Thank you very much for the interest and for showing up. It's the right thing for the wrong reasons. We hope it's for the good reasons sometime soon. We're going to present to you the results of a project we launched on late last year. We were four Venezuelans at the CID. So we spent most of our time working in Venezuela ad hoc, and then at some point someone decided to formalize the informal market of hours devoted to Venezuela and launch a formal project. And the idea is the first thing we were trying to do, given that there's a total lack of statistics, is find out where we are. And then so we hire lots of people in Venezuela that are in public institutions and work with us anonymously. And then we incorporated lots of HKS professors that have given lots of feedback to us. So this is a result. I know that politics of what's going on in Venezuela are very important for everybody, and they're on the news, super overrepresented all the time. So sensitive to that, we're going to present something that we hope we can finish in 20 minutes so that you know where's the country standing at this point economically and where are the challenges. And then, even though we're here and what's going on, the negotiations, the Vatican, the opposition is happening over there, we're very disconnected. You make a question, we'll do our best, but that's not our strength. So how did we get here? The story of how Venezuela, how an oil-rich country with the largest oil reserves in the world, got to where it is today is sort of surprisingly boring. And it's relatively easy. We just have the longest oil bonanza ever recorded. It's not the peak of the bonanza, which certainly was 1973 after the Arab oil embargo, but it's if you take the integral over the curve, it's a very sophisticated thing. It's the largest sustained oil bonanza, with oil prices peaking at 100 in 2010, 11, and 12. And with that, because of international finance is always pro-cyclical, because you had a lot of money, then everybody wanted to lend you money, and very cheaply. So Venezuela took advantage of that and multiplied by 5 its interest-bearing foreign debt, the one we have information about. I'm sure the total debt, arrears, people knocking at the door because they haven't been paid is much higher. But the interest-bearing formal debt multiplied by 5 in a period of 6 years that coincide with the peak of the oil bonanza. In the meantime, the debt was hired out of the central government. A key feature to understand what has happened in Venezuela is that the administration of Hugo Chavez broke the public budget in pieces that went away from the scrutiny of the National Assembly. So the central government, which is the budget that normally gets approved at the Assembly, now Nicolás Maduro had decided that the budget gets approved at the Supreme Court, but Chavez had the budget approved at the National Assembly, and instead of denying that, he started to create his own funds. And then he started to handling money through PDVSA, as if PDVSA were a sort of social fund, and then through the Chinese fund. So when you look at the increase of the external debt of Venezuela, most of it was hired out of the central government. And because of that, we have no idea. When I tell you no idea, it's not vague, it's literally no idea where did that money go. We know how much came in, but we don't know how much go. So here's PDVSA. PDVSA went from a debt of 3 billion, this is a state oil company, 3 billion to 45 billion in 10 years. And you can see here that the investment in the fields was kept constant, which is the blue bars there. And because of oil depletion and depletion of the fields, in oil you need to invest more to maintain production. And so because we invest the same, production kept on coming down. So it started at 3.3 million barrels a day in 2006. It ended at 2.8 million barrels a day in 2015. And it's estimated to be at somewhere between 2.3 and 2.4 million barrels a day by the end of 2016. So you took advantage of the price boom, you didn't invest, and you started losing production, but of course a quantity by prices equation still was highly favorable. Second thing we did is creating this fund with China to finance development projects. So it's interesting because China gives money to a fund that it's administered by Venezuela and invested in social projects, and that fund gets paid by shipments of oil. So here you can start having an idea how come an oil company can lose money, because you start sending lots of barrels to China that you're never paid for, but you're amortizing a credit line that was used by someone else within the public administration. So the debt with the China fund went from 3 billion to 25 billion. That's net. In total, we received $54 billion. $54 billion. That's roughly 50% of the GDP I think Venezuela has now. And we owe of those 54, 25.5 by the end of 2015. And because oil prices came down and we paid with oil shipments, we have to ship ever more oil to pay for the same debt. And by 2015, we were sending an estimate of 350,000 barrels a day, for which we got nothing in return because we had already spent that money in advance. The important thing here is PDVSA realized a lot of social expenditures we're going to describe in a moment and used the money for things that had nothing to do with the oil business and we have no idea about, because the company was taken out of the financial markets that you need to report, and then debt was issued at the Luxembourg stock, and those reporting requisites are much lower. And the Chinese fund is totally obscure. We have no idea where did the money flow or what it was used for. And with that, the government promoted a consumption boom. This is consumption of the public sector in red. It grew 51% in volume since the beginning of the Chavez government in December 1998 until December 2015. And then private consumption grew 41%. So even at the end of 2015, where you can see that consumption sort of came down a bit, the total accumulated, an average citizen will be consuming 40% more in volume than in 1998. So it's a huge consumption boom that did not have any mirror in production. When you track down production, which is the green line on this chart, the compounded annual growth rate of Venezuela over these 18 years is 0. So you have a huge boom in consumption that had no counterpart whatsoever in production. It was financed with oil and with debt. At the same time you're having this, you're having the state taking over the economy. On the left you have the growth rate of public GDP in red and private GDP in blue. So you can see that throughout the period, with the only exception of 2006, the GDP of the public sector has grown amazingly and the private sector has lagged. The reason for this is that our expropriations. When you expropriate something, that was something that was previously accounted as private production, that is now going to be accounted as public production. So it's just a transfer of property. And on the right, you see the state taking control of import. When the government of Chavez started in 1998, the state imported 60% of total imports. By the end of 2015, the numbers were 50-50. So you have a state that is taking over the economy, and then it produces all the dollars and moves to using half of the dollars that we can account for. So it's a massive process of expropriation and change in the institutional ownership of the property. And at the same time, they started running large fiscal deficits. So they weren't happy with the oil bonanza. But you say, well, why are they increasing debt if they have this oil bonanza? Well, it has to be the case that they spend a lot more than what they got. And that is the case. Beginning in 2009 and 10, public deficits started to approach 10% of GDP. And lately, when oil prices came down, it's been around 10, 15, 17, 16. Again, this is our effort to consolidate public accounts, grab the central bank, grab PDVSA, grab the Chinese fund, grab the Fondo de Desarrollo Nacional, and a myriad of smaller funds that go totally unaccountable, and add that. So our total deficit by 2012, which is a year that oil was at $100 per barrel, you were running a deficit of 18% of GDP. Exports per capita skyrocket, imports per capita skyrocket, and you also finance a massive capital flight. So the money coming from oil and debt was not only used to finance a large consumption boom, it also financed large capital flights in the middle of an exchange control. And this led Carmen and Reinhard and I to write a paper that it's called From Financial Repression to External Distress, where we argue that controls cannot stop capital flight when you threaten people with repression. When the interest rate is 10 and inflation is 40, people will run out of the domestic currency. They don't care if there are penalties, they go to Yale, they run out of domestic currency. So the controls created that scenario, but the benefit is that with the exchange control, you choose who's leaving. Without the exchange control, everybody that want to run away from the domestic currency can run away. With the control, you decide who runs away. That's a key source of power for the government, and it's a key element of the political economy of the reform coming. Where you can see the figures. We're talking here 21 billion, 23 billion. For you to have an idea, if you add capital flight from 2006 to 2015, and you take the year that Venezuela imported more food from abroad, capital flight is equivalent to 20 years of food imports. Capital flight, if you add up to 2006 to 2015, it's roughly $200 billion. And the year that Venezuela imported most food ever was 11 billion. So we have flew outside more or less 18 to 20 years of imports, food imports. And of course, poverty came down. Poverty came down because it's a huge consumption boom, lots of social programs, the exchange rate highly overvalued, cheap imports going around the country. So poverty, and you can see that poverty came down from 2003 or 4. We had a national strike that took poverty up and then down again. Progress in poverty for the Chavez administration stopped at 2006. Even though in 2010, 11, and 12, oil went to 100, the progress in reducing poverty stopped at 2006, and poverty got flattened there at around 30%. Still quite an improvement from when Chavez got to power, when poverty was more around 60, 65%. So he can claim that he helped poverty, and in a way he did. And then what happened is oil prices come down. So if you follow the thought that I've given to you up to now, and then you bring oil prices down, then it's like a domino chain, because first of all, the international markets, as soon as oil prices started to come down, stopped lending to Venezuela. So when you need the money more, no one is willing to lend, and then you're forced to make very heavy capital amortizations on debt, which hasn't worsened the cash flow problem. Normally countries, they issue debt to pay for debt, and you only include in the deficit the interest. Venezuela has been for 3 years, with oil prices very low, amortizing debt in net terms. Now the Venezuelan country risk is not at 30, it has improved significantly, it's at 25%. That means basically that markets are shut down. And then we were left with this problem in 2015. We had exports of 37 billion, and in 2014 we have imported 48 billion. So if we had kept in 2015 the imports we were doing in 2014, we would have registered a deficit of 10 billion in the current account. But then you have a service balance that it's negative because PDVSA is hiring companies to help PDVSA get production out. And then you have a rent balance that is small, and then you have to pay interest and debt. So when you were there, if you had asked yourself at the beginning of 2015, what happens if I keep the same level of imports that I had in 2014, which wasn't a good year? Well, you would have faced a deficit of $30 billion. So how was the deficit covered? Well, then we have to pay China. Well, first of all, they cut imports 10 billion. So if you see that the cut in imports of 2015 was very moderate. But then they resorted to all other pockets, like when you arrive late home and you start searching through the pockets of the jackets and everything. So they went to China, they sold gold, went to China, got all the debt with Dominican Republic and Nicaragua and discounted it. We sell them oil at a long-term, 2% rate long-term. So they pay 20%, and the rest, 80%, Dominicana pays in 20 years at 2%. That was a great idea Chavez had. But then we went out with that debt and discounted it and got half of what it was worth. 4 billion. And then we took Citgo, a network of refinery and stations here in the US, and we issued debt at Citgo, 2 billion. And then we went to the IMF. Venezuela went to the IMF and requested the special drawing rights, another 3 billion. And you can see that slightly they did a gold swap. They took the gold and international reserves and swapped. And they made it finally to the end of the year by selling other assets around. But when 2015 was over, we were very clear that it had been a nightmare, and it had been only the beginning. Because for 2016, oil wasn't expected to recover, and you have already exhausted all your stock of foreign reserves abroad. So 2016 started with reserves at a historical minimum, and then the government took a decision that is very interesting, and we can talk about later. We are going to keep on servicing debt. We're not going to default. And basically the cash flow becomes a very easy exercise. You have oil exports, you have debt service, and whatever is left is imports. And the number that is left, if you put it in real terms per capita, is that number you see there on the right. So you can say that Venezuela went from importing $2,300 per capita in 2012. That's the year we lost the elections with Hugo Chavez. To importing this year $650 per capita. So it's a 70% decrease. So when you look at the shortages, when you look at people making lines, when you see children dying of diseases because they don't find the medicines, this is what's behind. It's a decision to keep on servicing debt that in 2016 amounted to, give or take, $10 billion. And then you exhausted all your sources of financing, and then you need to make the cash flow zero. So you have to decrease imports in that amount. It's a huge import cut, which is super surprising. It's a socialist government that hates capitalism and Wall Street, and yet keeps on paying debt that has a yield of 25% and cuts imports on its own population. Carmen Reinhardt, who's seen a lot of these, says, I've never seen this in the world. I've never seen a country, because you have to think of punishment technology. If you stop paying the financial markets, well, they have developed a punishment technology. And if you stop paying your commercial trade chain, they have a punishment technology. Well, you would expect the latter is much stronger. I'm not selling you anymore. I'm not selling you medicines anymore. I'm not selling food anymore. So you're cut down your trade to what you can pay in cash. And you pay the other guys that have also a punishment technology. Why Venezuela has taken this decision, it's not clear. It's a very interesting point. There might be some political economy. There might be some fear that oil trade is interrupted, which will bring the government down in a second. It might, but it's open to discussion. So there was a collapse in imports, and because Venezuela is all imports, there was a collapse in production. So oil production came down. We have already seen that. This is what they've done with the PDVSA. This is the company, the state oil company, and you can see this is in points of GDP what the government charged on PDVSA on different social programs. So you have PDVSA transferring money to a fund called the National Development Fund, totally unaccountable. They transferred $83 billion in 10 years. No idea what happened to that money. Other taxes, PDVSA funding something called Fondo Independencia. It was a brief spell in 2010, no idea what that is. And then PDVSA has to pay royalties for oil and taxes. So when you look at the cash balance of PDVSA, it became negative very fast. And it's very obvious how you bankrupt a company this way. You have a percentage of oil that it's giving away by credit to the Caribbean. So you get 20% cash, 80%, 20 years at 2% interest rate. You send lots of barrels to China to amortize debt that someone else expends. And then you are charged with all these social programs that you need to pay in cash. So when we are going to say later that Venezuela is printing lots of money to finance the deficit, the mechanism is PDVSA doesn't have enough money to pay for all its expenses. So they go to the central bank, they give the central bank a paper, and then the central bank prints bolívares for them, and the monetary base keeps on growing like crazy. During the years of Chavez, the economy started moving away from the tradable sector and getting more focuses on services. So this is a key feature of the crisis, because you overvalued the currency so that you can import cheaply and have a consumption boom. You destroy whatever was left of the tradable goods sector. And you develop a sector closely linked to imports. When you import, you need insurance, you need credit, you need transportation and logistics. So all those things start growing, but it's GDP based on imports. Once imports stop, all those activities collapse, and you don't have sectors to provide dollars when oil prices came down. So have you seen this product space of Ricardo? And
Yeah.
that's the product space of Venezuela in 98. Watch out that I reduced the comparative advantage thresholds to 0.2%. For the ones that have no idea what I just said, that means this is a network of products, and all the products you see highlighted in a color are products where Venezuela had exports positive in 1998. Not much, just positive. These are all product lines, and if you have that lighted, it is that you exported that good, even if it was in a small fashion. That's 2014. So the government destroyed, it wasn't much when you add up in dollars, and I want to talk about that later. When you add this in dollars, Venezuela has always been an oil country, and non-oil exports were never amounted to much. But they destroyed whatever was left out of that base, and we only now have some 15 lines of exports open out of 774 products. Then they have this huge deficit, but because they ran out of oil, and because no one is willing to lend Venezuela, they started printing money, and then this is the percentage of GDP that you finance printing money. It's around 17 to 20%, and of course, because of that, inflation skyrocketed. And if you take official figures, inflation last year was 181%, with food at 320%. Those are official figures. Now we have started tracking 58 products of the food basket monthly, and the monthly inflation rates that are coming out of that basket of 58 products, it's on average for what we have here until September, 24% monthly on average. That basically means 1,200% inflation of food items in 2016, and this is the running rate. This is a combination of you printing money, you not having imports, so you have more money chasing ever less goods, and you chasing the little producers that have been left around, and also a consequence of the government liberating prices de facto. So the Maduro government has decided to let people sell at whatever prices they want. But because of the way they did it, you're left with the worst case scenario. The worst case is, well, now things are a lot more expensive and people cannot pay for that. The good thing is a lot of people will think, oh, I can sell that food in that price, so I'm going to put my own dollars and bring this food from Bogota, Barranquilla, from elsewhere. No, because the legal apparatus of the price controls was left intact. So if you talk to a sugar producer in Venezuela nowadays, he said, yeah, I see the price in the black market. I could make lots of money selling at that price. But if I get a raw sugar shipment and it arrives in the port in Venezuela, the guards will ask me, where did you get the dollars to import this? And if you tell him, these were my own dollars, that's illegal. So it's a de facto liberalization, but all the legal structure is there. So no one has ventured to import with their own money, or very little people, and then you have this huge price increase, which is toppling now 1,300%. And then poverty, all the progress that has been made. Look at the real wages in Venezuela in constant 2015 bolívares. The blue section is food stamps, and the red section is what you get in cash. So basically inflation is running at such a huge pace that the real salary collapsed. But it's not only that collapse, it's that today is mostly composed of food stamps. And these food stamps do not count for your labor benefits and prestaciones sociales. You know,
welfare protection.
Yeah, so worker protection schemes, they don't count. And so all the salary that you get in Venezuela today, it's food stamps. And then, of course, what's the Venezuelan real salary in the context of Latin America? Well, I'll let you choose. Because if you do it at the official exchange rate, it's $9,000 a month. The official exchange rate is 10 bolívares per dollar. But if you do it at the second official exchange rate, which is slightly above at 650, the salary is $140. And if you do it at parallel market rates, the salary is less than $2 a day, $55. And you have a range of countries you can use to compare, but it's interesting that Chavez for a long while portrayed the increase in the salary in dollars as his most greatest achievement. And they have stopped doing that, but Chavez always divided that between the lowest official exchange rate. Of course, the spreads were 50%, they were small. Now they are 10 and 1,500. And then all the progress we have done in poverty vanished. Because the people didn't learn how to do things, they weren't more productive, there was no basement for that, just a consumption boom. So why we changed colors there is because poverty started to go up, the government decided to stop publishing statistics. And then some universities in Venezuela have put up a 5,000 people survey, not very big, that is trying to estimate poverty, and they're coming up with this figure of 53% 2014, 76% 2016. It's not the same base, it's not methodologically correct, but we have nothing else. They just stopped publishing statistics the moment they didn't like these statistics. So what we have, it's a state that has substituted the market in all forms of coordination. The state is a producer, the state assigns resources, and the state controls whatever is left that he doesn't do directly. So how to get back on track? I'm sure many of you sitting there have thought, like, well, this is relatively easy because, I mean, you need to unify the exchange rate. You cannot work at 10, 650, and 1,500. You need to unify that. Absolutely. You need to liberalize prices and liberalize interest rates controls, and you need to privatize massively. You need to start selling back to the private sector, who you expropriated 6 to 8 years ago. Selling them, well, selling, it's an overstatement because you might have never paid them. So it's just returning, if they want them, all these assets. And then you have to do some tax reform. So these things, well, then you have to stop the deterioration of the oil industry. You bring what Mexico and Brazil are doing. You make state participation an option and not an obligation. But these things only work in Excel. I mean, the fiscal measures we need to take, liberating gasoline prices, liberating electricity, liberating the water price, telecom, food, medicines, these only work in Excel. So the real challenges are adaptive, and I just want to finish with this. To me, the worst danger that Venezuela is facing is having someone coming and say, hey guys, this is very easy. You just have to free the exchange rate. Sort of Jeffrey Sachs in Bolivia when they had the hyperinflation. It's just a series of measures you have to take that will correct all this disequilibrium. The problem is that Venezuela has always lived out of oil. But here, you have our total oil production in gray. So I'm just saying that Venezuela is producing today 2.7 million barrels a day. Venezuela in 1969 produced 2.6 million barrels a day. So it's the same production, but we're a lot more people. So when you do that per capita, let's say if the government, instead of giving away dollars and bolívares, they give away barrels, you would receive today 81% less than you would receive 50 years ago. So oil is not what it used to be. And we need to become a normal country, and being normal is very difficult. Then Venezuela was an astonishing success growth story from 1922. This chart is 1950 because I'm using central bank data. From 1950 to 1978, Venezuela was the star performer of growth in the world. since 1978, we haven't grown. So yes, Chavez and the socialists destroyed whatever there was left. But to be frank, it's not that we had a lot back then. We've been stagnant for 20 years. That's the reason Chavez made it to power. He was elected in 98, growth stopped in 78. 20 years of stagnation with poverty levels going up to 60%. These are poverty levels in 1975, 82, 88. So Chavez was elected here, somewhere here, with poverty at 65%. So we haven't grown much. And to be frank, it's not that we did a lot other than oil before. So what we need is something different. We really need to start, I mean, the solutions we have applied to our problems before will not solve the problem now. So what we need is, we will not export our way out of this crisis. If we wait for oil prices to come up, a lot of people will die in the meantime. There are too many claims on too little resources. We have a huge financial debt. We have a huge commercial debt. We have a huge line of companies at ICSID and the World Bank protesting because they were expropriated and not paid. And then we have the people, what I call the social debt, which is the people that we, as a government, we haven't been able to provide even the most basic goods. So those have claims on Venezuela. And those guys are getting organized and are getting around, but we don't have resources to pay everything. So at some point, the country will have to decide. Maduro has been deciding on this. He's decided he won't do anything to improve the economy, and he will use the scant amount of dollars he's getting for oil to pay the foreign financial debt. So commercial debt is being piled up, arrears pile up, ICSID line pile up, and the social debt is huge. So at some point, someone will have to make a decision with regard to this. We need a new social contract. Chavez really distorted what you should expect from the state as a citizen. So the state had to give you food, has to give you a job, you should work 35 hours a week, not really 40 hours a week. That's just terrible. Look at the French. So he kept on bringing these isolated examples. So they got, at some point, everything without producing anything. So now, we as a country, we need to come to terms to that. Like, we can only live to the extent that we are able to produce, because oil is not what it used to be. And that implies a big change of what is it that the state is going to do for you to help you out, and what is it that you have to do for yourself and for the state. There's a new, to me, there's a need for a new understanding, a new social contract. And then you have to think, and with this we can leave open to questions, that if reform takes place, if we implement a reform, reform will occur in a country that has all of its institutions destroyed. All of the institutions have been destroyed, dismantled, filled with people with very little education that feel entitled to those positions. Why not? They graduated from the Chavez universities in record time, so they have the pictures there on the wall. So they want to stay, but the institutions have been dismantled. There's a huge social unrest, which goes beyond Maduro. It's a social unrest caused by unemployment, by hunger, by lack of medicines. That is out there in the street. And then you have some characteristics of a failed state. You have certain buckets of Caracas that are dominated by paramilitary units that are armed, that do not respond necessarily to the state. So what's going to happen to those people when you step in? So if reform ever happens, it will happen in a very, very restricted context. And I'm not sure what is it possible to do with this within the context of democracy, of you need a superior power. Well, in Latin America, those stories never ended well. So I will leave that up to you, and then you can ask questions to all the people that work in this project. That it's not only me, it's Ricardo Hausman, that couldn't come because he has a red coat on Interpol. He's downstairs, but Maduro yesterday requested on TV that Ricardo be pursued by Interpol because he's an international conspirator. Those things are easy to put up and then are easy to put down. But we have Douglas, Jose Ramon, Alfredo, so all the other Venezuelans that have been devoting lots of time to Venezuela, hoping we can get this implemented, or some sort of this implemented at some point, and we can go back. Well, thank you.
questions, we have a microphone here. Okay. And make sure there are questions, because I have a lot of questions.
It is a question. Okay. We understand the economic solutions to the problem, but what do you like? How do you see it can be implemented in terms of politics? Like, what are the first steps that need to be done from outside and from inside? What your opinions would be? Thank you.
Should we do a couple and then?
Sure.
So to add to that, how likely do you think it is that the government will be able to avoid defaulting in next year or year and a half?
Thank you for the insights shared. I'd just like to ask, are there any of the policies that the Maduro government has implemented that you agree with? And if so, please share them.
So I might start actually with the last one.
Okay.
I must start with the last one. So with the specifics of the Maduro government, I would say that there are two things. One explicit and one implicit that we might agree. The one explicit is that they have started very timidly to change social programs to be, instead of subsidizing goods, to provide direct subsidies to individuals, so to create direct unconditional cash transfer programs. This is very timid, they're only done for approximately 30,000 people, but one of the arguments that we have is that if a lot of these social programs would have gone towards directly subsidizing poor people versus controlling the price of goods, we might have avoided part of this crisis. So that's a policy that if implemented and pursued and continue, that is something that we agree with. Something else that has been done very timidly, again, has been, and that we might agree in concept but might not agree in execution, is eliminating or reducing subsidies for gasoline. So the Maduro government, for the first time since 1996, increased the nominal price of a liter of gasoline this year. And when I mean the nominal price, I mean the nominal price. So in Venezuela, there is this argument that say that if you fill up a tank of a Hummer at Venezuelan prices, you can drive around the world with the cost of filling a tank of a Hummer in the United States. Because there, you can fill up the tank of a gas with, the tank of a car with less than
20 cents.
20 cents. So this obviously has an enormous social cost. This has been running during the whole Chavismo government. So Chavez started in 1998. This hasn't been increased since 1996. So holding that nominal price fixed with high levels of inflation implicitly means that you have had a social program that cost $160 billion. That benefits disproportionately the extremely wealthy that have private vehicles, and not only that, that benefits those that perform counterband. So we believe that at least half or 2/3 of the social cost of the gas subsidy is actually people that are taking the gasoline, probably organized through means of state, and selling it abroad. And that is a direct transfer through corruption. So by increasing the price of gasoline, what they have done so far is just that the production cost equals the selling cost. That means that we don't sell money by literally selling gasoline. That is where they have gone so far, and I think that this goes just a bit of it. I think that it should go further into that the international price of gasoline should be the local price of gasoline, but that the receipts, at least that is our proposal, that the receipts of this increase does not go to finance irresponsible government expenditure, but that transforms into another form of social program. So gasoline subsidies is a social program right now, but directly towards the rich and those that take away the money, take away the gasoline to other countries, and transform that to a program that directly finances the consumption of goods. So those are two ideas that I think are in principle correct, but are nearly not sufficient to manage the crisis. I don't know if you want to take another question.
On one of the other questions about the politics of some of the reforms that we're advocating for. I mean, the situation is well. Hello, can you hear me? All right. So this situation is compared historically to the episode of the Carlos Andrés Pérez government in between 1989 and 1993, I think. And the idea there at that point in time was that, you know, there were like very strong distortions on the economy, very big imbalances that were, you know, that would imply that would, you know, the reserves were in negative terms in the short term, international reserves. So the situation was dire. I don't think comparably as dire as what we have right now, but it was very strong. And then, you know, there was a government at the time that wanted to push an agenda of reform for modernizing the Venezuelan economy. And the thing that I think is very different from a political standpoint in the two episodes is that at that point in time, that government got elected when a party, you know, a president that belonged to the same party that the elected president came from, you know, was like running down on reserve spending and controls, and had like created this artificial sense of prosperity right before the new president comes in saying like we have to tighten our belts to this level that is, you know, very unpopular. So they had avoided any type of crisis to the at the moment when they tried to push the reform. They avoided the cliff, but now we're off the cliff, and we've been living, you know, falling under the cliff for the last 2 years, and I think that makes a huge difference politically in trying to sell the reforms, because we now know what happens when you take these things to extreme, and what it is that everyone that was saying all this time that things should have been done differently was trying to prevent. So I think that in a sense, and we felt it this summer when we would spend some time there, like the political environment is much more inviting of some of the conversations that were anathemas before, like, I don't know, privatization, price liberalization. How do you address the deficits? Everybody understands that the external deficit has to be, you know, so everybody's discussing about the debt now, and these were, you know, in political circles that in the context of a huge oil bonanza were like talking other things, right? Like freedom of expression, and, you know, very important things, but not these things. So I think that if there's anything good that can come out of this, is the fact that the crisis can allow for an opportunity for collective learning that some other Latin American countries went through in the past, and that after reverting to the left did not go through the same road we went, right? Like Bolivia went leftwards, and this is not happening there. Ecuador went leftward, this is not happening there. Nicaragua went leftwards, this is not happening there. So I think this is a process of collective collective learning that we're gonna go through, and that I think is the only like a good thing that can come out of it.
Yeah, no, shortly, so we can have more people ask a question. If you look what's going on in Argentina right now, you have the administration of Mauricio Macri trying to tell the people, guys, what we avoided was terrible. But people doesn't have that view of things. They just inherited state of affairs, and with the Macri reforms, they're somewhat worse off at the beginning, so there's a lot of unrest. I understand what was Argentina headed, and I understand that Mauricio Macri stopped that way, but people don't see it that way. And as Moncho was saying, in Venezuela, it already exploded. It already happened. We don't have to explain what happens when you massively implement price controls. We don't have to tell them what happens when you massively expropriate. It's already there, and that certainly gives you some capital. We'll answer later on default.
Thank you. I found your presentation interesting, and I will try to make first a comment and then end with a question. The comment is that apparently, if you follow your graph, the slope down started in 1998 with the arrival of Chavez. But at that time, you already had 40% of poverty in the country, very high. So the arrival of people like Chavez, Castro, and Saddam Hussein, Mussolini, Hitler, you can may go on with the list. It's not by chance alone. Those people arrive because something is going on in the society. And I think in your analysis, you should have include an analysis of what was going on in the society in Venezuela to explain why Chavez was elected, because he was elected by the people, right? Then, one of the things I learned here at the Kennedy School was the importance of context. If you ignore the context, your diagnosis is very difficult. And if you don't have a diagnosis, you can barely implement a treatment, right? So this is the comment, and I think it's something that, in my opinion, was lacking in the presentation. And then you mentioned the adaptive challenges, but adapting, in order to address the adaptive challenges, you need adaptive work, right? And then don't you think that an analysis of what was going on in the Venezuelan society, that's the question, is something that, in addition to base the economy on the prices of commodities, that we all know that what the result of that, don't you think that a better analysis of the Venezuelan society and what's going on would be helpful for it to implement the changes and the reforms and do the adaptive work that would be necessary in the future? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question would be about human capital, and if it were possible, in a reiteration or a second paper, you would do the same kind of analysis of trends of the export of human capital over these past several years, and particularly the kind of human capital that would be necessary to implement your recommendations. Economists, scientists, entrepreneurs, executives, trained public administrators, and so on. The impression I have is that that has been exported almost to the same degree as debt has been exported. But let me just ask, number one, would you agree with that? Number two, what would your hypotheses be about what percent of the human capital necessary to implement your economic recommendations is not available any longer? And will it be attracted back as a political change?
Yeah, you mentioned the Chinese loans, and in your graphs there was an outsize, those were outsized, but there's a lot of chatter about the impact of Chinese loans. Do you think that that was really significant in facilitating some of this, or would it have happened anyway?
Yeah. Well, the Chinese loans, the problem with the Chinese loans is that you pay with short-term oil projects that, if at some point give any yield, are long-term. I know of one project paid with Chinese funds, which is a rail that goes from Caracas to Puerto Cabello, to the port. And when I arrive in Caracas and I drive to see my parents 2 hours away, I drive along the rail, and I can see the rail tracks are there, the tunnel the rail goes through are there. I don't know if there was at some point a socio-economic evaluation of this, but it's there. Let's assume this is going to be great for Venezuela. We're going to get that return in 50 years, but we have to pay that in oil 2 or 3 years. So my problem with these Chinese funds is that in the best case scenario, there's a large mismatch between the benefit you get, if you get it, and the cost and the way you pay. There's a mismatch in the flow of funds. Then lately the Chinese, when you withdraw from the fund, give you half in renminbi and half in dollars. That makes the evaluation of the welfare derived from those funds very difficult, because Venezuela is forced to import from China, because you have the renminbis there, things that you probably wouldn't have imported otherwise. So Venezuela is full of Chinese motorcycles, hired ACs, all over the place. Well, you can't say, well, the world is like that. You would have imported that. Yes, because we were forced, I cannot gouge if we would have done that anyway. And then it was done in a totally obscure way. We have no idea where the funds were implemented. And I understand the Chinese are not very happy about that and didn't figure out that well at the time. But these are things that Venezuela will certainly need a relationship with the Chinese and the aftermath of Maduro, for sure. But it has to be made out in a way that it has a chance of benefiting us and that it's transparent. So far, I will say the impacts have been minimal, if not zero. We did a debt repurchase with some funds from there that, you know, I know where some money went at least. And then the question, I agree with you, I don't disagree in a word with what you said. It's a massive export of highly qualified human capital. We're working now on Panama, and we have noticed that how Panama has grown out of Venezuela immigration, among other factors, of course. So the last question is difficult. I mean, if there's a change and they call me, I will arrive the day after. But that's me. And I know many people that have made their life abroad already. So I think I think there's no citizenship in capital. Because if you do things right and returns are attractive, capital will come. There's a lot of people in Venezuela obsessed with, is this capital the capital that flew up? Man, I don't know, I don't care. It's a capital that flew up, went up to the international market, and it's part of a pool of capital you need to attract. I'm telling you this because I think we need to think in that way with respect to people. If we create a place where people can get high returns for their labor and are safe and secure, and it's an attractive place to live, I think Venezuela has a great potential for that. Then we shouldn't care if the guys returning are the same Venezuelans that left, but I believe we can have a potential to attract qualified human labor, and we'll have to do some migration reforms so that we don't really care where they are from, but we care about their skills. And yeah, I agree on, I mean, this was a presentation on how the thing went wrong. But I tried at the end to summarize things that went wrong when Chavez started. It was not a socio-political analysis of the situation that will deserve a whole different attention. But I agree with you that we need to think why this happened to us. It's very important how a country tells to itself its own story. So Chavez came up because he told us our story in a way. He found a way to tell us our story in a way that people thought like, man, that's what happened to me. He's right. Then we need to find that. We need to understand what was attractive on that. And then we need to find our own story. I mean, the reforms we're implementing has to come in within the context of a larger narrative. What happened to us over these 18 years? And within that context, sure, we'll have to revise why he came up at the beginning and so many others, not that extreme, because his arrival in power was after the coup in '92, sort of more democratic, and he walked a lot the street and gained the heart of the people, and not like others. But we'll have to think about that, and we'll have to put up a narrative that it's cohesive, and that when people see us implementing reforms, they don't see the price of gasoline went up. No, they see we were giving away resources to the rich people. So these people is setting the record straight, because within the context of a larger story I don't have yet, there's a narrative that helps people understand what's going on. And that's the tough, I agree with you, it's the toughest component. And it's the one where made the least progress.
The answer to this question is very painful, because you trigger the sense of accountability. And that sense of accountability has to be spread in the society. Yeah. Otherwise, without the cooperation of society, you would not be able to solve it.
Agree.
Just a small note on the migration question. There is very little data with this, as with anything Venezuela related, on immigration. But some estimates put that number at between 1.5 to 2 million people. This is between 5% to 8% of the population that has left the country in the past 5 to 10 years. And most of these people are highly qualified individuals, very professional, that have made their life anew in different countries, either in the United States, Spain, Chile, Panama, even Australia. Now, there is the bad side of it. This is the people left. But giving our broader CID understanding of this, migration of this might be very difficult in the short run, but might be very positive in the long run. because migration benefits not only those that receive migration, but also benefits those that export migrants. Part of it might be because these people will then return to Venezuela and will bring some means of knowledge or production that did not exist in the country beforehand. And all these little dots that disappear might appear anew with people that went to other countries, learned different ways, learned different know-how, and brought that know-how back. And the other way is you don't have to return to influence your homegrown economy. There have been a number of studies saying how Indian immigrants are helping the Indian startups back home by outsourcing a lot of jobs. And we have seen also cases in Albania, etc., for which how the diaspora is engaging the country they left behind. However, that means that you need to have a strategy to engage your diaspora and engage those people either for them to return or for them to engage in a productive fashion from wherever that may be. But definitely at this moment that is a very much a liability that might end up being a strength if we attack it strategically. But right now, difficult thing.
And on those two comments on that same question, the only thing I would add is that on the issue of the human capital deficit, is that this might be an uncomfortable conclusion, but it doesn't seem that the way to, like the main policy to address human capital deficit is not education. Because if you train more engineers and you don't deal with the things that are making all of the engineers left, then you're losing money. So basically your efforts have to be on how to build an ecosystem where the cost of bringing expats into the country is not so high for companies, so that Venezuelans that you would expect would have lower costs of returning would also start returning. But it's a more environmental conversation more than how much are you spending on, like, returns to human capital in Venezuela are incredibly low. I mean, our peers that went there, both the ones that graduated with us from college or the ones that came to the Kennedy School, got an MPP and went back to work for the Chief of Staff of Mayor of Caracas. I mean, it's definitely not the economic part that's bringing them back, and you cannot ask the bulk of the people to make decisions based on things different than that. So I guess that's the only thing.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.